She lost consciousness right there in the park, holding her triplets close to her. But everything changed when a billionaire walked by, subscribed to the channel, and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. The soft hum of the smart blinds lifting was the only sound that stirred the silence inside the penthouse. Warm sunlight spilled over polished marble floors, crawling across the modern leather furniture, bouncing off chrome fixtures that gleamed like museum pieces. Jonathan Miles lay awake long before the blinds opened, eyes fixed on the ceiling, arms folded beneath his head. Another day, another cycle of silence. He rose without a word, the hardwood floor cold beneath his feet. A slight groan escaped his lips as he stretched, the stiffness in his shoulders a reminder of another sleepless night. The smell of freshly ground espresso filtered in from the automated kitchen downstairs. Elena, his longtime housekeeper, had likely preset the schedule as always. The routine was flawless, efficient, predictable. His closet, selected by a professional stylist months ago, offered row upon row of charcoal, navy, and off-white athletic wear. He picked one without thought and changed mechanically, lacing his running shoes with the same deliberate care he gave to contracts worth billions. The elevator hummed softly as it descended from the 35th floor. Jonathan stared at his reflection in the mirrored walls. A handsome man in his early 40s, dark-haired, with eyes too tired for his age. The world saw a tech mogul, a visionary, a titan of artificial intelligence, but behind his eyes lingered a dull vacancy that success couldn't fill. Outside, the early Chicago air was crisp, the kind that wakes the lungs. Grant Park stretched out before him like a curated escape from urban sprawl, its manicured lawns and cobbled paths already welcoming early risers. Joggers passed him in pairs, earbuds in, dogs in tow. Couples strolled with paper cups of coffee, their quiet laughter cutting through the chill. He ran alone. The steady rhythm of his sneakers on the path was meditative, almost soothing. He counted his breaths as he rounded the rose garden, then the lagoon, where ducks skimmed across the glassy surface, undisturbed by the occasional tourist. It should have brought peace, this calm, golden morning, but all he could think of was how artificial it all felt. He was a man surrounded by people, but untouched by intimacy. Not since Ava. He rarely let himself think of her, and never during daylight. But something about this morning, the stillness, the weight in his chest, opened the door. 10 years had passed since she'd left. 10 years since he'd found her suitcase by the door and a handwritten note explaining that she couldn't live in a world built for machines, not people. He had loved her. Maybe not perfectly, but fiercely. Since then, he'd built walls, taller, stronger, wrapped in code and contracts. As he turned toward the wooded grove near the southeastern end of the park, his pace slowed. A cluster of old oak trees shaded a long bench where he usually stopped for water. But today, something was off. A crooked stroller sat near the bench, its frame rusted and cloth torn. A child's cap hung loosely from the handle, and beneath the frayed canopy, he spotted a tangled pile of blankets. No movement. No sound. Jonathan's chest tightened as he drew closer. A woman was slumped sideways on the bench, her head bowed, hair falling in messy waves over her face. Her clothes were wrinkled, stained. A canvas bag spilled over at her feet. Diapers, baby bottles, an empty juice carton. He stepped closer. In the stroller, nestled together in a shared blanket, were 3 infants, barely 6 months old by his untrained guess. Their cheeks were pale, their lips dry, their movements lethargic. The woman didn't stir. "Hey," Jonathan said, voice low but urgent. He reached out and touched her shoulder, nothing. Her skin was clammy beneath his fingers. panic surged through him. He dropped to his knees and checked her wrist. A pulse. Weak, but present. He glanced at the babies again. One whimpered, a thin, papery sound that pierced something deep in his chest. He looked around. The path was oddly empty. A jogger passed far in the distance, oblivious. No officers, no medical staff. The nearest call box was several hundred yards away. Pulling out his phone, he hesitated. He could call 911. He should. But what if they delayed? What if this woman and these babies didn't have 15 more minutes? His car wasn't far. He could get them help faster himself. He lifted the woman gently. She was frighteningly light. Her head lolled against his chest, and he adjusted his hold to support her neck. With one arm, he wheeled the rickety stroller toward the parking lot. The front wheel jammed twice, veering off into the grass, but he kept going. His black SUV was parked along the curb. With effort, he folded the stroller with the infant still inside, carefully, securely, and loaded them into the back, fastening the base with one hand while balancing the woman in the passenger seat. As he drove, he called Elena. "Elena, I need the doctor at the house, now. 3 babies, maybe 6 months. 1 woman. They're in bad shape. Get food ready, formula, electrolytes, whatever we have." Elena, as always, didn't ask questions. Her calm voice relayed instructions to the kitchen and household staff with military precision. The 10-minute drive back to Lincoln Park felt endless. He kept glancing at the woman beside him, her face hollow, lashes fluttering with each bump in the road. The babies stirred in the back, their faint cries a reminder that they were alive. Still fighting. The gates to the property opened as the SUV pulled in. Elena was already at the door, wearing a medical apron alongside Dr. Kaplan, a seasoned pediatrician who had long served Jonathan's family. A nurse followed closely behind. Jonathan carried the woman inside while the stroller was rushed to the sunlit sitting room where the babies were gently transferred to blankets on the floor. Dr. Kaplan worked swiftly, checking pulses, respiration, hydration levels. The nurse prepared IV lines with practiced hands. "They're dehydrated," Kaplan said grimly, "malnourished, will need to rehydrate carefully. Formula, IV fluids, we can stabilize them here for now." Jonathan nodded, standing over them like a sentinel. "What about her?" "Exhausted, undernourished, probably hasn't eaten properly in days," Kaplan replied. "She needs rest and fluids." Jonathan stepped back, his arms tingling. The woman stirred on the couch. Her lips parted. "Noah, Layla, Ava," she whispered hoarsely, then fell back into unconsciousness. "Names," Jonathan murmured. A nurse labeled the babies' bands accordingly. 2 girls, 1 boy. He stayed there for hours, unable to walk away. He watched as one of the girls, Layla, squeezed the doctor's finger. Noah coughed and squirmed under his blanket. Ava blinked, her lashes fluttering. They were tiny, fragile, alive. By late afternoon, the sun spilled through the tall windows, casting golden beams across the room. The woman, Maya, as he'd learned later, began to wake. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes dulled by exhaustion but alert with panic. She tried to sit up. "Where?" she rasped. Jonathan knelt beside her. "You're safe. You were in the park. I brought you here. The kids are okay. They're being looked after." Her gaze flicked to the babies, and her body relaxed a fraction. "I tried," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." "You did enough," he said quietly. "You kept them alive." She looked at him then, eyes glassy but focused, and something passed between them, not recognition, not yet, but a fragile understanding. Later, Kaplan would confirm that with proper nutrition and care, All 3 infants would recover. Maya herself would need a longer road, physically, emotionally, but she was stable, alive. Jonathan sat in the armchair that night, lights low, as the house hummed with new energy. The silence he once cherished now felt suffocating. He looked down at a photo he'd found in her bag. Maya, smiling with the babies, maybe a few months ago, all of them radiant with hope. Who was she? Why had no one helped her sooner? He stood, walked to the nursery where the babies now slept in new cribs ordered within hours. Maya rested in the adjacent room, her hand still curled protectively near her chest. As he pulled a blanket over her shoulder, she stirred. "Thank you," she murmured, eyes closed. He hesitated, then touched her hand lightly. "You're welcome," he said, though the words felt too small. He lingered a moment longer, watching the rise and fall of her breath, then stepped out into the hallway. Behind him, a home once ruled by silence now echoed with the quiet rhythm of life. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Miles didn't feel quite so alone. Morning came slowly to the Miles estate, the first rays of light seeping through tall windows and casting soft patterns across the floorboards. The silence in the house was no longer sterile. It had taken on a breath of its own, shaped by the hushed murmur of voices in the hallway, the gentle hum of the baby monitor, the distant clink of kitchen utensils preparing breakfast. For the first time in years, the rhythm of life in Jonathan's home had shifted. It no longer revolved around algorithms and business forecasts, but the soft breathing of 3 infants in matching cribs and the faint, lingering voice of the woman sleeping behind the closed door of the guest suite. Maya stirred as the light reached her face, her fingers curling reflexively around the soft edge of the blanket that had been pulled over her shoulders sometime in the night. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment she simply stared at the ceiling, blinking away the remnants of a dream she couldn't recall. The air smelled clean, faintly floral and unfamiliar. It took several seconds for memory to settle in. The park, the stroller, her legs given out beneath her. The man's face, concerned, unreadable, hovering above her as she slipped into unconsciousness. She sat up too quickly. A wave of dizziness rushed through her, forcing her to grip the edge of the bed to steady herself. Her body ached, not the sharp kind that came from injury, but the deep, hollow ache of depletion. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but it was a dull throb, as if her body had grown used to not expecting nourishment. Still, she looked around, taking in the warm, cream-colored bedding, the polished wood furniture, the sheer drapes fluttering in a breeze from an open window. She was in a place meant for rest, for safety. And yet, her first instinct was flight. Her hand went to her chest. The necklace was still there, a small, worn locket that had belonged to her mother. Relief bloomed momentarily. Then came the panic. The babies. Where were they? She pushed back the covers and stood, swaying slightly on her feet. Her clothes had been changed. She wore a simple cotton robe, soft against her skin, and her hair had been gently combed back, tied loosely. She moved toward the door, opening it slowly. The hallway beyond was quiet, sunlit. The scent of coffee and warm bread drifted in. She followed it, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floors. Down the hall, through an archway, she stopped. There they were. Noah lay on his back in a crib by the window, hands waving lazily in the air. Layla was curled on her side, sucking 2 fingers, while Ava made tiny grunting noises in her sleep, her arms flung dramatically over her head. Each crib had been adorned with a soft quilt, a small plush toy tucked into the corner. The room was airy, spacious, filled with the soft hum of a white noise machine and the subtle glow of a baby monitor light. She pressed a hand to her mouth. They were alive, safe, clean, and not because of anything she had done. "Good morning." The voice was quiet, measured. She turned sharply. Jonathan stood in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a simple gray sweater, a coffee mug in one hand. He looked at her with a kind of cautious calm, as though unsure if she'd bolt or break down. "I didn't mean to startle you," he added, stepping inside and setting the mug on the small table by the door. "I just wanted to check on you. You've been asleep nearly 18 hours. She nodded slowly, still watching the babies, her body unmoving but her mind racing. "They're okay?" she asked, her voice a dry whisper. "They're better today. Dr. Kaplan says they'll need a few more days of fluids and formula, but they're strong. Fighters." She nodded again, and her hand went instinctively to the locket. "Thank you," she said after a long pause, the words thick in her throat. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't—" He waved a hand gently, as if brushing away the idea of thanks. "You were in trouble. You needed help. That's all I saw." Maya's eyes lingered on him now, studying the man in front of her. He was polished, sure, but something about his presence felt grounded, not pitying, not performative, just solid. "I need to go," she said, though she didn't move. Jonathan didn't look surprised. He stepped to the side, giving her space. "If that's what you really want," he said carefully. "But I'd rather you stayed, at least until you and the kids are strong enough to be on your feet." "I can't pay you," she replied bluntly. "I'm not asking you to. People always want something." He held her gaze. "Not this time." Maya hesitated, her eyes darting back to her children, then to her own reflection in the window glass, hollow-cheeked, skin pale, eyes tired but sharp. This wasn't a choice between pride and dependence. This was survival. For them. For herself. She nodded just once. "Okay, a little while." Jonathan offered a small smile, then glanced at the coffee mug. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Elena made oatmeal, fresh fruit, eggs. There's juice, whatever you want." She nodded again, and when he left, she didn't follow immediately. She walked to the cribs, resting a hand gently on Noah's chest, then Layla's curls, and finally Ava's tiny foot. Her eyes filled with tears, but none fell. Later that morning, she joined them in the kitchen. Elena greeted her with a warmth that made Maya feel, oddly, like family. There was no forced politeness, no stilted pity, just the steady comfort of a woman who had run homes like this one for decades. She handed Maya a plate and simply said, "Eat." Maya ate. That afternoon she asked for a broom. She insisted on doing something, anything, to repay the kindness. Jonathan declined at first, then relented when he saw how tense she became at the idea of idle gratitude. She swept the nursery, folded laundry, organized the changing table drawers. She moved carefully, but with purpose. By evening, the babies had been fed, changed, and tucked into their cribs. The soft lull of a white noise machine echoed in the room as Maya sat on the love seat nearby, her legs tucked beneath her. Jonathan entered quietly, carrying a small tray with soup and a glass of water. "I thought you might be hungry again," he said. She gave him a cautious smile and accepted the tray. He lingered, unsure if he should stay, then settled into the armchair across from her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. "I used to be a teacher," Maya said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan looked up, attentive. "2nd grade. Before I had the babies. Before I lost Tom." "Tom?" he asked gently. "My husband. Car accident. He died 6 weeks before I gave birth." Jonathan nodded solemnly. I'm sorry." She shrugged, but her eyes shone. "We had plans. A little house in Bronzeville. I was going to finish my master's. He was going to start his own handyman business. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours." She paused, then looked down. "When he died, I lost everything. The job didn't wait. The rent piled up. No one wants to hire a pregnant widow with no child care. I held on as long as I could." Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard. "I failed them," she whispered. Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You didn't fail them. You brought them this far. That takes more strength than most people ever show." She looked up, eyes glassy. "You don't even know me." "No, but I've seen enough to know you're not someone who gives up." Silence settled between them again, but it was softer now, warmer. "I want to work again," Maya said, her voice firmer. "I don't want to live on someone's generosity." Jonathan nodded. "I can help with that, if you're willing. I can't afford school again. I didn't say I was charging you." She hesitated. "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Because sometimes people need a hand to get back on their feet. And maybe I've spent too long surrounded by things that don't matter." Her eyes held his for a long time. "Okay," she said. That night, after the babies were asleep, Jonathan stayed up in his office researching credential renewal for teachers in Illinois. By midnight, he had bookmarked 4 online programs, contacted 2 administrators, and forwarded the information to Elena for printing. Downstairs, Maya checked on her children once more, smoothing a blanket, adjusting a pacifier. She lingered by the window, staring out into the Chicago skyline, her hand resting on the locket at her chest. Tomorrow would be different. Not easy, not guaranteed, but different. And maybe, just maybe, she could begin again. Rain fell softly that morning, tapping against the wide windows of the nursery like cautious fingers, adding a gentle rhythm to the hum of white noise and infant breathing. Maya stood in front of the cribs, arms crossed, a mug of tea cooling between her palms. Outside, the sky hung low, gray and swollen with more rain. She'd always loved mornings like these, before everything fell apart. When Tom would put on jazz and she'd make pancakes, and the day felt like it belonged to them, not the world. Now she watched her 3 babies sleep peacefully, pink-cheeked and full-bellied, unaware that life had shifted again. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had collapsed under the weight of exhaustion and hunger on a park bench, cradling them with the last remnants of strength in her arms. And now, here she was, in a house too grand for her imagination, warm and fed, her children tended to with care she hadn't dared to hope for. She hadn't spoken to Jonathan yet that morning. He had risen early, as always, quiet in his movements as if not to disturb the new balance that had settled over the house. Their shared conversations had grown more natural over the past few days, marked not by pity, but by mutual respect, and something else she dared not name. He had become a constant, his presence no longer strange, but solid, reliable. The nurse arrived mid-morning to administer checkups for the babies, and Maya helped with the weigh-ins, carefully logging each number with a quiet satisfaction. They were gaining. Slowly, but steadily. She swaddled Ava afterward, humming gently while the rain slid down the glass. The moment felt peaceful, whole. Then came the knock at the front door. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed, but then a second knock followed, firmer, insistent. Maya turned her head toward the hallway, confused. She wasn't expecting anyone. Few people even knew where she was. And then she heard it. the low, slightly raised voice of one of the estate's security guards. "Sir, you need to step back from the gate." Maya froze. The nurse didn't notice, continuing to adjust a monitor on Layla's crib. But Maya's heart had already begun its descent into a well of cold. Another voice followed, rougher, familiar. Too familiar. "I have a right to see her. She's family. I'm not leaving." Maya's knees went weak. She stepped away from the cribs, her mug slipping from her hand and landing with a muffled thud on the rug. The tea spread quickly, darkening the fabric, but she didn't notice. Her mind was already spiraling. That voice, that cruel edge, it couldn't be. She ran. Jonathan was already at the entryway when she reached the top of the stairs, speaking calmly to one of the guards via intercom. The camera feed showed a man standing on the other side of the iron gate, soaked from the rain, shoulders hunched in a worn trench coat. Even blurred by the drizzle, Maya recognized the posture, the hard-set jaw. Raymond Brooks. She stopped cold, her breath catching. Jonathan glanced up, his expression unreadable, but his eyes flicked quickly to hers and softened. "Maya," he said quietly, "he says he's your brother-in-law." Maya couldn't speak. Her hands clenched at her sides. "He was turned away by the guard, but he's refusing to leave." Her voice finally came, brittle and small. "I know him. That's Tom's brother." Jonathan didn't move, waiting for her to go on. "He tried to take the babies after Tom died," she said, swallowing against the bile in her throat. "Said I wasn't stable. Tried to get social services involved. Said I was unfit. It almost worked." Jonathan's mouth tightened. "He hit Tom once," she whispered. "Tried to control everything. Said I was dragging Tom down. After the funeral, he came to the shelter. Said I needed to give him the kids because I was too broken to raise them." The memory returned with a sickening vividness. Raymond shouting outside the shelter gates, her arms wrapped around all three of them, her voice hoarse from sobbing. No one had come to help. No one had believed her. Not entirely. Jonathan exhaled slowly, jaw flexing. He turned to the guard through the intercom. "Tell him he's not welcome. If he doesn't leave, call CPD and file trespassing. Do it now." Maya stepped forward. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "If it's him, if he's trying again, I have to talk to him." Jonathan turned to her, frowning. "Maya, you don't need to face him." "I do," she said firmly. "If I don't, he won't stop. I know him. He'll find another way. He always does." Their eyes met, and Jonathan saw the storm building behind her fear. She wasn't just a frightened woman anymore. She was a mother ready to fight. "Okay," he said finally, "but I'll be with you." The guards opened the gate slightly, and Raymond was escorted onto the front drive, his coat dripping, his eyes scanning the facade with an expression of smug distaste. He looked older than Maya remembered, heavier, grayer, but the sharp cruelty in his expression hadn't dulled. "So it's true," he said, nodding toward the house. "Living in a mansion now, huh?" Maya stood behind Jonathan, arms folded, chin high. "What do you want, Ray?" He smirked. "You know what I want. Those kids are blood. My blood. You can't expect to keep them here, living off some stranger's money, parading around like some damn queen." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "You're on private property. Say what you came to say and leave." Ray looked him over with a sneer. "Oh, I see. This your sugar daddy now, Maya?" "Figures." Maya's hands clenched. "You don't get to talk to me like that," she said, stepping beside Jonathan. "You don't get to show up here and act like you care. You haven't lifted a finger for us in over a year." "I've been talking to people," Ray snapped. "Family services, lawyers. You don't have custody rights, not officially. I still got a shot." "No, you don't," Maya replied, voice rising. "You don't get to decide anything for my kids. A judge already turned you down once." Ray smirked, stepping forward until the guards blocked him. "We'll see what the next judge says." Maya didn't flinch. "Get off this property, and if you come near us again, I'll get a restraining order." Ray opened his mouth to respond, but the guard stepped in, guiding him away with firm hands. His eyes burned into hers as he left. "This ain't over," he spat. "You're not fit, and I'll prove it." As the gates closed behind him, the rain quickened, washing away the marks of his boots from the driveway. Maya didn't move. She stood there, shaking, until Jonathan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said, "but I will be." Inside, the babies had woken. Maya returned to them, her movements stiff, her voice low as she rocked Layla in her arms. Jonathan stood silently by the doorway, watching her. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her lips pressed together tightly to hold back emotion. Later that night, after the babies were asleep and the rain had stopped, he found her in the library. She was sitting by the window, a glass of water untouched beside her. "He's not going to stop," she said without looking at him. "No, probably not." "I'm scared," she admitted, "not just of him, of losing them, of someone deciding I'm not good enough." Jonathan sat down across from her. "No one who's seen what you've done for them could believe that." "He has money now," she continued, "a job. He's got connections I don't have." "I do," Jonathan said softly. "I have them, and they're yours now." She finally looked at him. There was something in her expression, raw, vulnerable, but burning with quiet strength. "I don't want to hide anymore," she whispered. "I want to fight, but I need help." "You'll have it," he said. "I'll hire the best. We'll get full custody formalized, whatever it takes." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't know why you're doing all this," she said, "but thank you." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "Because you shouldn't have to do it alone." She smiled, the smallest curl of her lips, but it was real. That night, he made the first call to a custody attorney. By morning, the papers were drafted. He transferred a retainer that would make even the most jaded legal firm take notice. Maya spent the next day holding her children a little tighter, speaking more gently, her movements slower but more intentional. There was no longer room for fear, only space for resolve. She was done running. And she knew now that someone had finally decided to run beside her. The morning after Raymond's intrusion arrived wrapped in a calm too quiet to be trusted. The rain had passed, leaving behind a glistening sheen on the mansion's stone steps and the distant trees along the perimeter of the estate. The air felt heavier than usual, filled with the tension that lingered in every corner of the house. Though Raymond had been removed, though legal paperwork was underway, the sense of violation remained. For Maya, the confrontation had stirred a storm far deeper than anything that had fallen from the sky. Still, she woke early, fed the babies, bathed them with care, and dressed them in the soft onesies Elena had washed and folded the night before. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, but her chest felt hollow. The way Raymond had looked at her, like she was nothing, echoed like a bruise behind her ribs. Yet, every time she held Ava's tiny fingers, every time Noah gurgled at the ceiling, or Layla cooed from her crib, a flame sparked back to life inside her. She had lost too much already. She would not lose them. Jonathan hadn't seen her yet that morning, but she knew he was near. He always was. His presence had become a quiet, stabilizing force in her days. He didn't hover, didn't smother her with sympathy or insist on discussion. Instead, he gave her room, space to breathe, to find her footing, to fight the battles she needed to fight without being overwhelmed by his resources or protection. After breakfast, he appeared at the doorway of the nursery, not in his usual crisp work clothes, but in jeans and a navy crew neck. His expression was unreadable, but when his eyes met hers, there was a softness in them, an invitation rather than an expectation. "I was thinking," he said, with that low, measured tone of his, "if you're still interested in those education programs, I found a few options." Maya looked up from the rocker where she held Ava, blinking in surprise. The thought of school felt both foreign and tantalizing, like a dream tucked away in a box marked later. "I am," she said after a pause, shifting Ava against her chest. "I just didn't think it would still be possible. Not after everything." "Well, it is," he said, walking farther into the room. "There's an accredited online certification program that matches your background. It's flexible, self-paced, and starts this month. I already reached out to the director. If you want, you can audit the first module for free." Her mouth opened, then closed again. It wasn't just the offer. It was the way he presented it. Not as charity, not as obligation, but as something she had every right to pursue. He wasn't giving her a gift. He was offering her a bridge. "What's the catch?" she asked, narrowing her eyes a little, though a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "There's no catch," he replied simply, "unless you count using my home office during Zoom lectures. Elena will insist on dusting it before every class." Maya chuckled despite herself, her muscles relaxing for the first time that morning. She brushed a hand over Ava's curls. "I'd like to try," she said. "Just try." "Good," Jonathan said. "You deserve to get back what you had, or better." Later that day, with the babies asleep and the monitors set, Maya sat at the polished desk in Jonathan's office, her laptop open, a notepad beside her, and nerves crawling under her skin. The course portal blinked softly on the screen. Foundations of Elementary Education. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard as she entered her login credentials. This wasn't survival anymore. It was something new. Reclamation. Jonathan didn't hover. He passed by once with a plate of fruit and tea and vanished without a word. Maya worked through the first module, absorbing content about learning styles and classroom management, her mind flexing in ways it hadn't in years. She took notes, nodded along, felt something ignite again. She wasn't lost. She had been dormant. That evening, while preparing bottles with Elena in the kitchen, Maya found herself humming. The rhythm of bottle washing and formula mixing no longer felt like desperation, but care. She still felt tired, often overwhelmed, but there was shape to her days again. Meaning. Jonathan entered with a light knock on the door frame, his sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed. "How's the student doing?" he asked, nodding toward the laptop tucked under her arm. "I didn't fail anything yet," Maya said, setting the bottle down and drying her hands. He leaned casually against the counter. "I always thought education majors had the toughest job. You're not just teaching content. You're shaping humans." Her brows lifted. "Is that your way of saying I'm doing something more important than inventing robots?" His smile tugged wider. "That depends on the robot." She laughed, and for a moment, the kitchen felt less like a stranger's domain and more like a home. After the babies were down, Jonathan offered a walk in the garden. Maya hesitated, then agreed. They strolled side by side through the winding paths, between rose bushes and small fountains, their conversation slow and comfortable. She told him about her classroom from years ago, the chaotic joy of second graders, the way one student used to call every shape a quadrilateral, and how Tom would laugh when she recounted their antics at dinner. She hadn't spoken about Tom like this in a long time. Jonathan didn't interrupt or shift uncomfortably. He just listened. At one point, she stopped walking and glanced at the stars overhead. "I thought I'd have to do it all alone," she said. "After he died, after the shelter, I thought that was it." "You didn't," he said gently. "No, but it felt like it. And now," she trailed off, unsure, "now you're doing it. Not because someone rescued you, but because you kept going." She looked at him, searching for a trace of disbelief or patronizing comfort. There was none. "You've given me so much," she said. "I don't even know why." Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "I think you already know." The words hung between them, electric and unspoken, a truth neither of them had dared to name. Back inside, they returned to the nursery. Jonathan picked up Noah, who stirred in his sleep but didn't cry, and held him close. Maya watched from across the room, her arms folded loosely, her eyes soft. He looked so natural, so grounded, the way his hand cradled the baby's head, the way he moved with quiet instinct. "You're good with them," she said quietly. He looked over, smiling faintly. "They make it easy." "No, they don't," she replied, "but you don't run from it." He set Noah back in the crib and turned to face her fully. "I ran from a lot of things for a long time," he said, "but not this." The closeness of their bodies, the hush of the room, the shared weight of survival and hope. It was too much and not enough. Maya stepped forward, her fingers brushing against his as they adjusted Ava's blanket. The contact was brief, but it burned with something undeniable. They didn't speak again until he reached the door. "Good night, Maya." "Good night," she whispered, but neither of them slept easily, not with the pull growing stronger, not with the boundaries between them beginning to blur. Trust had been built not in grand gestures, but in quiet choices, and now it was becoming something more. In the days that followed, they settled into a rhythm. Maya continued her coursework, finishing modules ahead of schedule, surprising even herself. She scheduled a virtual meeting with an advisor and began planning for certification exams. Jonathan checked in every evening, asking questions, showing genuine curiosity. His respect never felt performative. He didn't hover, didn't pretend to understand her path, but he walked beside her, and that was enough. The babies thrived. They grew plumper, laughed more, slept longer hours. Maya learned to share their care with Jonathan, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He changed diapers without complaint, mixed formula with precision, and once even sang a lullaby off-key until all three of them stopped crying from sheer confusion. Maya had laughed so hard she nearly fell over. There were difficult moments. Maya had nightmares, memories of shelters, of eviction notices, of holding her babies and wondering if tomorrow would come. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and tiptoe to the nursery just to see them breathing. Jonathan began doing the same. Sometimes they met there, both silent, both watching the crib lights blink softly in the dark. They never spoke during those visits. They didn't need to. One night, after a particularly emotional lecture on child trauma and resilience, Maya sat in the library with her textbook open and tears silently sliding down her cheeks. She didn't notice Jonathan until he set a mug of tea beside her and pulled a blanket from the back of the chair. "Bad day?" he asked softly. She nodded, closing the book. Just everything. I used to think I was past it, but I'm not. You don't have to be, he said. You just have to keep going. She turned to him then, her eyes red but clear. Why are you really here, Jonathan? He didn't look away. Because this is the first thing in years that feels real. You, the kids, this house full of noise and bottles and tiny socks. I didn't know I needed it, but I do. She didn't respond at first. Then, very slowly, she leaned forward and let her head rest against his shoulder. For a long moment, they sat like that, unmoving. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. Somewhere upstairs, a baby stirred and settled again. Maya didn't speak. She didn't need to. The warmth in her chest was no longer fear or gratitude or desperation. It was trust. And it was growing. The late spring sun crept gently over the windowsill, casting a warm golden glow across the nursery floor, where scattered toys and folded laundry told the quiet story of a long, full day. The house breathed with the weight of life now, every hallway echoing with a giggle, a rustle, a sigh of fatigue. It was no longer the pristine, near-silent museum of a billionaire's existence. It was messy and rhythmic, filled with the chaos of small children and the kind of warmth that made even the emptiest rooms feel lived in. Maya had just finished laying down Layla, gently rubbing small circles over her back until the baby's eyelids drooped. Noah was already asleep, a soft snore escaping through his nose, his hand curled around a plush giraffe. Ava, the lightest sleeper, stirred restlessly, her legs kicking beneath the blanket. Maya leaned over her crib and whispered the same lullaby she used to sing back in the shelter when she'd had nothing else to offer but her voice. It was a simple tune, something her grandmother had hummed years ago, and now it lived on in the breath between verses. Down the hall, Maya heard footsteps, measured and careful. Jonathan. He always walked that way in the evenings now, as if the rhythm of the house had shaped his own movements. She didn't look up when he entered, but she knew it was him. She could feel his presence before he even spoke. I brought the humidifier, he whispered, holding up the small unit in one hand and a bottle of filtered water in the other. Dr. Kaplan said it might help with Ava's breathing. Maya took it from him with a nod and began filling it. Her eyes were tired, but her hands were steady. She's been coughing more tonight, she said. Her chest doesn't sound right. Want me to call him again? Maya hesitated. Maybe in the morning. Let's see how she does with the humidifier first. Jonathan didn't press. He stepped beside her, watching as she adjusted the settings. A soft whir began to hum from the machine, and a cool mist lifted into the air. Thank you, she said, glancing up. He smiled gently. You don't have to thank me every time. I know. I still want to. Together, they stepped back and watched Ava settle more deeply into sleep, the tension in her limbs gradually melting away. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the baby monitor and the moonlight pooling through the curtains. It was peaceful, deceptively so, because beneath the calm, something was stirring, something Maya had tried to suppress. She turned to Jonathan, her voice quiet. Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something to go wrong? Like things can't possibly stay this good? His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that she saw the truth in it. Every day, he admitted. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Maya moved toward the door, and Jonathan followed her. They stepped into the hallway, closing the nursery door behind them. I think I'm just scared, she said, her voice barely more than breath, of how much this matters, of how easily it could fall apart. Jonathan reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was steady and certain. "I am too," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere." Downstairs, the kitchen was still warm from dinner. Elena had made pasta again, her third time that week, but no one complained. The babies had mashed more of it into their high chairs than their mouths, and Maya had laughed so hard when Ava tossed a meatball onto the floor that she nearly cried. Jonathan had tried to catch it midair and ended up knocking over a glass of water instead. It was chaotic and ridiculous and absolutely perfect. Now, as they sat at the island counter, Maya nursed a cup of tea while Jonathan worked on assembling a new set of child-proof cabinet locks. "You're getting good at this," she said, watching him wrestle with the plastic latch. "I've had excellent teachers," he replied, nodding toward the stack of parenting books Elena had brought down from the attic. Maya smiled, but her expression turned serious. "I want to ask you something." Jonathan looked up, his hands stilling. "If something ever happened to me, if Raymond ever managed to—" He cut her off gently. "He won't. But if he did," she continued, her eyes searching his, "would you take care of them?" The room was suddenly very quiet. The question, though hypothetical, carried the weight of something sacred. "I'd give everything I have to keep them safe," he said, "and I'd make sure they knew how much you loved them." She nodded, but her hands were trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have asked that." "No," he said firmly, "you should, because it matters." She blinked rapidly, and then, without thinking, she reached for his hand again. He didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned in, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Maya," he said softly, "you're not alone anymore. You don't have to prepare for the worst every day." She nodded, tears pressing behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. They spent the next morning together in the nursery, reorganizing the changing station, sorting through new donations from one of Jonathan's community outreach partners, soft clothes, children's books, blankets. Maya watched Jonathan hold up a onesie with a dinosaur on it, his eyebrows furrowed in mock concentration. "Is this backwards?" he asked. "No," she laughed, "but it would explain why you've been putting their pants on upside down." He feigned offense. "I'm a fast learner." "You're a brave one, at least." He glanced at her then, more serious. "I'd do it 100 times over if it meant they were okay." That afternoon, they took the babies out to the garden for the first time in days. The sun had returned, warming the stone paths and awakening the tulips and daffodils. The babies lay in a large playpen set up on the grass, babbling and flailing their limbs while butterflies darted through the air. Maya and Jonathan sat nearby, a picnic blanket between them. She brought out her laptop, reviewing course materials for an upcoming assessment. He watched the children, pointing out a bee to Layla and narrating its path like a storybook character. Maya looked up from the screen, her heart swelling at the sight of him. "This is what I always wanted," she said softly. "Not the house, not the money. Just this. Time, peace, laughter." He looked at her, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "You deserve all of it." They lingered there for hours, letting the babies nap beneath the shade of the maple tree. When Ava cried, Maya scooped her up, bouncing her gently as Jonathan wiped drool from Noah's chin and offered him a soft, teething ring. They worked in tandem now, effortlessly, like two instruments tuned to the same melody. As evening fell and the sky shifted from blue to lavender, they carried the babies back inside. Maya paused in the hallway, adjusting the blanket on Ava's shoulder. "Jonathan?" He stopped and looked back. "I don't know how to say this without making it sound like too much." "Say it anyway." She hesitated, then stepped closer. You're more than just the man who helped me when I was desperate. You're part of this now, part of us." Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And you're more than just a mother who needed saving," he said. "You saved yourself. I'm just lucky I got to witness it." Their eyes held for a long moment, and then, gently, Maya leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was quiet, steady, the culmination of countless small moments of shared fears and laughter, of diaper changes and midnight whispers. His hand came to rest on the small of her back, and she melted into the space where he held her. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I think I'm falling for you," she whispered. He smiled, voice hushed. "Then I hope I'm already caught." They stood there for another breath, and then Ava stirred in her arms, breaking the spell with a tiny yawn. Maya laughed softly and kissed her daughter's cheek. "I guess she approves," Jonathan said. "She's the boss around here." That night, after the children were asleep, Maya found herself back in the library, this time with Jonathan beside her, reviewing legal documents from his attorneys. Full custody papers, formal guardianship protections, emergency contacts. Every page was a shield between them and the man who still loomed outside the periphery of their lives. "You really did all of this for us?" she asked, skimming the last document. "I did it for my family," he replied without hesitation, and in that moment, she knew. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming something real. A home, a unit, a family. The world outside might never understand how it began. How a woman from a shelter and a tech mogul met in a moment of crisis and built something whole. But it didn't matter. What mattered was what they had now. What they were growing together in the quiet hours between feedings and classes and kisses. As the fire crackled beside them and the house settled into its nighttime stillness, Jonathan reached for her hand. "No more goodbyes," he said. She nodded, her fingers closing around his. "No more fear," she answered. Together, they sat in the glow of something stronger than safety. They sat in love. The morning sun streamed through the wide kitchen windows, casting pale gold across the polished countertops and the bouquet of fresh tulips Elena had arranged just an hour before. Maya stood at the sink, rinsing a bowl under warm water, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. The twins were playing with soft blocks in their high chairs, while Ava sat on the tiled floor with a picture book, babbling quietly to herself. It had been a peaceful morning. But peace, Maya had learned, never lasted forever. Jonathan's voice called from the hallway, sharp and clear. "Maya, can you come in here?" Something in his tone made her freeze. Not fear exactly, but urgency. She turned off the faucet, dried her hands quickly on a towel, and made her way to the home office. He stood behind the desk, a tablet in hand, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, there was no smile. "Raymond filed an emergency motion with the court," he said. Maya's heart sank. "What kind of motion?" "He's claiming you're unfit to raise the children, that you've been mentally unstable since Tom's death. He's asking for temporary custody." She felt the room tilt slightly, her breath catching in her throat. "That's not possible. I've done everything right. I have proof, medical records, my course enrollment, the pediatrician's notes." Jonathan walked around the desk and took her hands in his. "We're going to fight this. My lawyers already responded. We have everything we need. But the hearing is set for tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" she repeated, stunned. "That soon?" "They're pushing it through fast, but we're ready." She sat on the edge of the leather chair, struggling to breathe evenly. Ava's giggle floated in from the kitchen, a small sound that reminded her of everything at stake. Later that night, after the babies were asleep, Maya stood in the garden, staring out at the city lights in the distance. The same garden where she had first allowed herself to imagine a different life, a better life. The idea of it being taken away now felt like a cruel joke. She had fought so hard, climbed so far, and still, someone believed they could reduce her to nothing more than a label and a court order. Jonathan found her there. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, offering quiet company. Eventually, she said, "What if I lose them?" "You won't." "But what if I do?" He turned to face her. "Then I'll fight with you, every day, every court, every appeal. I won't let them take your children." She nodded, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "They're not just mine anymore." His silence was a confirmation. The next day at the courthouse, everything moved in a blur. They entered through the side entrance to avoid the reporters tipped off by Raymond's attorney. The courtroom was small, sterile, the walls beige, the lighting too bright. Maya sat between her lawyer and Jonathan, her hands trembling beneath the polished table. Raymond arrived in a suit that didn't fit well, his face smug, his voice full of artificial concern when he addressed the judge. He claimed Maya was traumatized, incapable of maintaining stable housing, and dependent on a stranger, Jonathan, for her lifestyle. He made her sound like an opportunist, a liability, a broken woman. But then Maya's lawyer stood and spoke with calm conviction. She presented medical records, psychologist assessments, child care documentation, and the full-course syllabus for Maya's teacher training. She read letters of reference from Elena, from the pediatrician, and from the online course director who had praised Maya's commitment and consistency. And then, to Maya's shock, Jonathan rose to speak. He told the court about the day he found her, about the condition she and the babies were in, and how, in the months since, she had become the most courageous person he knew. He said Maya didn't need him. She had simply never been given the tools to succeed before. He said she was the mother her children needed, that what she had built for them was a family built on strength and love, not on survival alone. And finally, he told the court that he had formally submitted an affidavit requesting shared guardianship if Maya ever chose it. When the judge asked Maya if she had anything to add, she stood on legs that barely held her, cleared her throat, and said, "I've spent the last year fighting for my children's safety. I've done it from a cot in a shelter, from a bench in a park, and now from a place where I've finally found stability. I'm not perfect, but I am their mother, and I have never, not once, put them second." The judge didn't make a decision that day. It would take 48 hours. But as they left the courthouse, Jonathan placed a hand on Maya's back, and for the first time she didn't feel alone in her fight. They returned home exhausted. The babies were fussy, sensing the tension. Maya held them longer than usual that night, humming to them until her throat was raw. Jonathan made tea and stayed up with her, neither of them speaking, both waiting. 2 days later, the ruling arrived via a call from the attorney. The court denied Raymond's request. The judge cited Maya's consistent care, documentation, and progress as grounds for sole custody to remain with her. The case was closed. Maya cried when she heard the words, not because she doubted herself, but because for the first time, a system that had so often failed people like her had chosen to protect her family. That evening, Jonathan took her to the same park where they'd first met. The air was warm, birds rustling in the trees, the city skyline glowing behind them. The twins sat in a stroller, Ava bouncing in a carrier on Jonathan's chest. They sat on a bench beneath an oak tree. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been working on something," he said. She unfolded it. It was a blueprint, a modest building designed like a community center. "This is a school," she said. "A beginning," he nodded. "For families like yours. For kids like Noah, Ava, and Layla. A place where they're safe, challenged, and seen." She stared at the drawing, tears in her eyes. "You're serious?" "I've already secured the zoning and the funding. I want you to help run it, design the curriculum, hire the staff, make it yours." Maya looked up at him, her heart full. "I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll do it with me." She smiled, and this time the tears fell freely. "I will." Later that summer, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, they were married in the garden, surrounded by the few people who had become their circle. Elena wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, the pediatrician holding Noah, the course director beaming at Maya like a proud mentor, and the children giggling, clapping, dressed in tiny matching outfits. The ceremony was simple. There were no cameras, no extravagance, just vows spoken under an arch of white blooms and a kiss that sealed a promise forged not in perfection, but in persistence. Maya stood beside Jonathan, holding his hand as they looked out at their children playing in the grass. The home behind them wasn't just a house anymore. It was a haven, a symbol, a miracle built piece by piece, fight by fight, day by day. They named the school the Haven Project. It opened the following spring. On the first day, Maya stood at the front doors and greeted every child by name. Some came from shelters, some from struggling families. Some walked in with fear in their eyes, the same fear she once carried. But by the end of the day, laughter echoed through the hallways, crayons colored their hopes, and Maya knew. Her life had been changed by one choice, and now she was building a world where every child and every mother might be offered the same chance. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Check out the other videos on the channel for more powerful stories like this. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see it.